Chinese authorities asking local governments to prepare for the potential downfall of the massive property developer Evergrande, according to the Wall Street Journal. Contagion fears rocking the markets earlier this week off the back of that story. Joining us now, General HR McMaster, former National Security Advisor to President Trump. His book, Battlegrounds, is out in paperback now. General, thanks so much for joining us. Good to see you again.
Hey, good to see you, Wolf. Thanks for having me.
I wonder, just a big picture question, whether you think talk of potential economic downfall's too big a word, but pressures in China is a good or a bad thing for the U.S. ultimately. Could it back them into a corner?
Well, I think it's time to confront Chinese unfair trade and economic practices and to recognize that really it's China and the Chinese Communist Party that is seeking decoupling on its own terms. I mean, I think that Xi Jinping has been quite explicit about that. You see that with the tech crackdown. You see that with the 100 or so additional regulations that have been put in place to extend and tighten the Chinese Communist Party's grip on power and control over, the so-called private sector in China. We know, of course, that by law, Chinese companies have to act as an arm of the party. And you're just seeing a manifestation of what Xi Jinping said he was going to do. And Wolf, I don't think geostrategic and regulatory risk is factored into the market. And it's time, I think, for American investors to take a hard look at a country that is not a free and an open economy, a free market economic system. It's an authoritarian mercantilist system that is taking aggressive action against us.
What did you make, General, of the Australia, UK, US security deal? Was it something that took you totally by surprise, or was it something that past administrations have been working towards behind the scenes already?
I think it's something that's been in the works for quite some time, and I think it's an important step forward in multinational cooperation among like-minded partners and allies to compete effectively with China. I think we're in a very dangerous situation, Wolf, these days, because I believe that Xi Jinping thinks he's winning. He thinks that America and the West is weak. I think that's connected to the disastrous, catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. But it's also connected with the narrative that he has created to help keep the party in power. And that's this narrative of national rejuvenation. Remember, at the last Communist Party Congress in 2017, Xi Jinping said it's time for China to take center stage in the world. And just think of the actions they've taken since that time in the midst of a pandemic, right? Bludgeoning Indian soldiers to death on the Himalayan frontier, weaponizing islands in the South China Sea. Of course, this massive campaign of economic coercion aimed at Australia. So what you're seeing is a higher degree of international cooperation. You'll see that, obviously, as President Biden hosts the Quad Summit tomorrow as well in Washington.
Do you think that the withdrawal from Afghanistan alters the odds of aggression from China towards Taiwan? And also, I mean, another factor that might alter the odds of that is the chip shortage that the US and the Western world is experiencing at the moment. Is that something you think China's welcoming?
I think that China will be emboldened by the U.S. Really, I think we have to call it what it is. I mean, essentially, Wolf, we defeated ourselves in Afghanistan and surrendered to a terrorist organization. And not only is that humiliating, but it emboldens our adversaries and rivals internationally. Deterrence, right? Convincing your adversaries that they cannot accomplish their objectives through the use of force is really an equation of your capability times your will. And I think that the Chinese Communist Party is assuming, I think wrongly, but probably assuming that our will is close to zero. And I think if there's an analogy to be made, it might be an analogy to the unenforced red line in Syria after the Assad regime committed mass murder of so many innocents with the most heinous weapons on earth. I think you can draw a direct line from that in 2013, 2014 to Russia's annexation of Crimea, invasion of Ukraine, as well as the building and weaponization of the islands in the South China Sea. So I think we're entering a very dangerous time. China's telegraphed it, right? They've said, hey, we're going to start patrolling Taiwanese airspace. Well, what does that mean? And then what it means is they're threatening Taiwan's sovereignty even more aggressively. I think if anybody has the stomach to read the China Daily, which is the Chinese Communist Party's really mouthpiece newspaper, they threatened Taiwan right after Afghanistan by saying, hey, do you think America's got your back? They don't have your back. It's time to accommodate with us. So I think we're entering a period of significant risk, Wilf, based on this perception of American weakness and how aggressive the parties become in the midst of a pandemic.
which leaves some of these U.S. companies in the middle. General, what would you advise a multinational company? Nike just made $2 billion in the last 3 months in China, as we just reported. What do you advise those companies and investors in those companies to prepare for? We're already so linked.
Well, I think they have to minimize the risk. Xi Jinping is actually minimizing what he sees as China's risk to their exposure to our markets and our economic and financial strength. And companies have to be responsible and do the same thing. Sarah, I think what companies should do is take essentially a Hippocratic oath to first do no harm by doing business in China or accepting Chinese investment in their own companies. Hey, first, don't help China develop a differential advantage over our military by the transfer of sensitive and emerging critical technologies. Second, don't help the Chinese Communist Party perfect its technologically enabled Orwellian police state, and don't help them commit genocide in Xinjiang by turning a blind eye to these activities. By saying, for example, we're of China and for China. In response to Chinese coercion, after some companies had the temerity to suggest that they don't want to use slave labor in the production of their products. And then finally, don't shortchange or don't compromise the long-term viability of your companies in exchange for short-term profits. And I think so many companies have done that over the years, right? And this has affected, of course, everything from wind turbines to solar panels to battery manufacturers and just example after example. I think we should learn from those examples now and recognize that doing business in China is a risk.